This computer, yes, please. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the House Hack podcast. Fantastic to have you joining us today. Our guest today is Jimmy Hosang. Jimmy, good to see you. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you guys?
Not bad. Not bad. So, Jimmy, you are the CEO of the Modular Analytics Company, an artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions provider, and you help people make decisions better. You're a self-taught programmer. You've built a career at the crossroads of people and data with a clear vision to change the way that data science is understood and applied. So hopefully that's bigged you up enough. Are you excited to get into it? I hope too.
Yeah, when you put all those words together, it sounds very pretentious, but yeah, that is it.
That's it. That's why we have it at the outset. That's exactly it. And just to note as well, you can find TMAC online at tmac.ai and Jimmy on LinkedIn as well. So Jimmy, starting off, what does TMAC do in your own words?
TMAC is I think he's a proudly different player within the AI machine learning market. And the idea and the notion that it's not about the tech, but it's around the tech and the people interacting with each other, I think is very, very important for us. I've worked in data science and analytics for 12 years, and I was always left feeling on all of the projects that I worked on that they were overpromised and underdelivered, and invariably the timescales for everything always got pushed back and back and back. And I had a little bit of a kind of crisis of confidence probably around 2017, which was a little bit like, what does it all mean? Because being involved in so many projects that most of them failed, it was a little bit kind of disheartening. And then when I came back and I started to take stock of the company, to take stock of my career, I started to understand that some of these challenges were a feature, not a bug. And then set about like coming up with a methodology where we could fix those types of problems. And that methodology is modular analytics, which is around short pieces of work that are deployed quickly and iteratively provide value, and doing so in a way that is cognitively trustworthy. So not overpromising, not under delivering, and building trust with our clients throughout the process.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think proudly different really sums you guys up. But to take it back a little bit, my next question is really about where it all began. So with that degree in media, performing arts, how did you then get to working with data?
That's a good question. So I think you've got to make your decisions very early. So I might get the timelines a bit wrong, but I think at 14 years old, you're choosing what you're doing for your GCSEs. And then what you do for your GCSEs, it follows on that you'll probably do something like that for your A levels. And then from your A levels, you go to university. And so I think that as a small child, I don't think I was naturally outgoing, but I kind of grew into becoming an outgoing person. My mother used to work on the markets. She was a salesperson. She sold clothes on the markets. And so I'm watching her sell and perform every day was quite interesting. And then, it felt quite natural for me to go into the arts, and I had to make that decision quite early. However, by the time I'd got to sort of 21 years old, I did feel as though, and I don't wish for this to sound rude to anybody who has got an arts degree or has worked in the arts, but I felt like I didn't have what I wanted out of my education, and I felt like I wanted to do more. And so I went through my early 20s kind of working in performing arts. I was doing plays and things, and I'm working behind bars. And it was only when I started to take more of an interest in something that I'd always been naturally good at, which is which was maths. I kind of sailed through from a maths perspective, and I didn't do maths because it was hard. And so I thought I'd do media studies instead, which, you know, some of my friends who've got media qualifications will be throwing daggers at me. And so I started to take an interest in numbers when I was managing some bars, and it was interesting around like the mix through which different product lines could change your overall gross profit. I'll tell you a really quick story. So what makes pubs lots of money is selling gin and tonics. So the reason why everybody sells gin and tonics nowadays is because a spirit and a mixer makes you more money than a pint of beer. So everybody promoted gin and tonics. I remember going on courses, which was like, how do you do a gin and tonic? So the bar that I was the assistant manager at, we effectively changed all of our kind of mix, and we started to push gin and tonics. Gross profits went up. And then cider came, bottled cider, Magners, and everybody started drinking Magners instead of gin and tonics, and our gross profits went down. So we were selling more Magners than what you could ever sell one summer, and our gross profits went down. And it's because the mix had changed, and that's what got me the idea that this is something that's really interesting around how you can change people's behavior, how you can use data to make decisions, and how like markets move. And that's how I started to get interested in analysis.
Nice. So it's kind of the psychology combined with almost that entrepreneurial spirit of trying to make the most out of a situation as well, in that back of the bar assistant manager role, which is really, really interesting. And how did that kind of lean into then handling, visualizing data and seeing it in one way, and the impact is one thing, but then teaching yourself programming is another? Because you said your background, you didn't like the fact that you hadn't loved doing maths at school, but then even now you're kind of faced with that data visualization aspect and trying to understand trends. Is that what led you down the self-learning programming path, or was it something else entirely?
So I think, so there was a sense that I would never be a good actor, and I wouldn't achieve what I wanted to achieve within that field. And then there was a sense that I was kind of drifting through, like, you know, job to job, and I wasn't really making the most of my life, really. And I think that's important. Like, you know, I'm not a religious person. I think you're here for, now to use a biblical like description, but you're here for like 70 years and 10, and you've got to make the most of it. And I was like, well, if I've got 50 more years to go, like, how do I make the most of it? That was one. And then ultimately it was, I had to support my family. So in my mid-20s, my daughter was born, and I had to think about how I could create a life for her and create a support system for her. And that was really important too. And I suppose, like, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. Those three things kind of coming together is what made me think around programming and how to stop wasting certain parts of my life doing things that were non-value add, and to devote those to like the pursuit of doing one thing moderately well.
Nice. And is that the thing that led you down the path? Would you say your why behind starting a business, and then even now taking it to scale, like that reason, that necessity to go and revive the family, is that still a core driver for what you do, or is it combined in other elements of supporting, say, your wider family, your team now as well?
That's an interesting question. What's my why? I think now, let me go back. So 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I needed to start a path to get that. And so I effectively, like, kind of ground out a career. I ground out a career trying to teach myself how to program. I ground out my first job, and I started to then enjoy the grind and enjoy enjoy conflict is the wrong word, but putting myself up against like difficult situations and overcoming them. And now that is as much a part of me as anything else. So it's very hard to say like what my why is, apart from my ambition to drive things forward and to push things forward. It's funny, like I was talking to my wife about when my career is over and retirement, and she kind of said, "You'll never retire, never ever." And it's true. Like now, like before, like when I was in my kind of my mid-20s to the person that I am now, like there's many things that are the same, but there's so much that's different. And it is that like the relentless kind of push to improve things for clients, improve things for the people who work for TMAC. And I've always tried to improve the lives of like all of the guys who've worked for me or worked with me, hopefully, and improve the life of my family as well.
Nice. And then with that big goal, that center of improvement at the core of what you do, almost liking a challenge, is there any moment in which you'll realize that you've achieved the end goal of an improvement milestone you're looking for, or a kind of a measurement of success with that, or is it always on to the next thing?
I think it's always on to the next thing. So, I think in so many aspects of my life, I think I could look back and say I've been very successful. But there's so much of my life which I feel as though like can be improved upon, and for me personally, like for me as a person, I feel as though there's a lot that I can improve upon, and I think it's very much like sport. The greatest sports people are able to not focus too much on the past and not focus too much on the future, and they keep themselves in a moment. And I think that's why kind of good entrepreneurs, I put myself loosely in that bracket, I think that's how they see life. It's about kind of keeping yourself in a moment, because life is a wheel. When you're on the way up, you can be on the way down, and when you're on the way down, you can be on the way up. And it's around centering yourself around that kind of ethos, and not thinking too far ahead or behind, I think is important.
Yeah, so you mentioned that relentlessness, that drive, that ambition. As you have grown and as TMAC has grown, how have you adapted yourself to the needs of that role as a leader, as the organization has grown?
I don't think that necessarily I'm a great leader, or I don't think I was born a great leader. Certainly not when I was young. I don't think I had particular leadership qualities. I was like gobby, but then a lot of my friends are really gobby as well. Yeah. So I was probably like slightly more gobby than the most other gobby people, but I wouldn't have put myself down as a leader. And I think a lot of my natural traits aren't necessarily prone to the qualities that you'd necessarily deem around leadership. Like I don't think I think I can be relatively confrontational about the things I'm passionate about, but I'm not really that way inclined. I think I'm a bit soft really in like loads of aspects of my life. Like Lauren, my wife, always makes fun of me because I always cry at Disney movies that we're watching all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily if I've got like this internal strength. And I think you guys know, we've spoken quite a lot before. I do have a tendency to, I think, maybe over communicate. So I just speak what's on my mind all of the time.
Mm.
And from where we were in 2018, where there was just me, and there was me and Sean, and then very quickly after there was George and Ruse, kind of, you know, we started talking. Like having to adapt where you've got a small group of people who effectively have been kind of, we all work together because we know what each other's flaws, and we solve for those flaws, to then becoming a company that's, you know, getting on towards 20, 25, 30 people. You have to adapt your principles, because it's not always the same where I can just speak my mind all of the time. Have to just process information and then think more about the right way to communicate that back. And I think that has been a real challenge. So I think, you know, as a leader of a company that is growing quickly, I think communication is important, and that communication is mainly around, you know, giving everybody a shared vision and then getting everybody to corral around that vision and drive that vision forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because hearing you talk about, like, I don't think there is necessarily that one leader that everyone needs to share the traits of, like that kind of archetype. I think everyone's personal styles is something that they will draw from, but it's interesting to hear about that adaptation as you've grown, of almost reining yourself in at times. But what I'd ask as a kind of follow-up to that, is there anything in terms of your lessons with TMAC up to now that maybe you used to take for granted, but don't anymore now you've got that benefit of hindsight?
I'd probably say that I used to take my friends for granted, like, a lot. And when you're in very stressful situations all of the time, I think it's good to have people who keep you grounded. Like, I feel as though I'm in like a really, really strange world where, you know, I've done a lot of bad analysis, and not everything that I've touched has turned to gold. A lot of it has turned to whatever, whatever you want to
The
call
other thing.
yeah, the other thing. And now, like, I'm talking to you guys in a podcast, and, you know, people contact me and they're interested in my opinion. Sometimes you can definitely run away from yourself, and so I think having friends who keep you grounded and telling you, yeah, that you might not be as much of a big shot as you think, not in those words, but in their own inimitable way, is really important. And then I think the last 12 months, and I think this is probably for everybody, like, your health. Like, your health is important, and it's something that you take for granted. And, you know, I've got 3 children. The youngest is only 4 months old and has been born kind of in the pandemic. And anybody who knows me, like, we met, in fact, you know, we met in the pandemic, that TMAC and the Hosang guys, but I'm not a person who particularly looks after themselves. So, like, you know, I drink a lot, occasionally have a cigarette when I'm drinking, and I drink a lot anyway. I think the pandemic has shone a light onto health being a really important part of your life. So I think those are the things, as the world starts to open up, I want to spend more time with my friends and my family, and then I want to get on top of my health and maybe stamp out some of the more unhealthy parts of my personality.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a learning a lot of us can take from the last year, even if it's not something that's directly impacts yourselves. To say if you haven't caught COVID or no one around you has, you've seen the impacts on a more wider scale. So very much realizing the health is a really important aspect as well. But just to take it back a second to that previous discussion point on being a leader and really the way in which it shaped your style within TMAC. Probably to take that back to its core element, to you, like, what does being a leader actually mean?
I think that being a leader is around the way in which you the way in which you portray yourself and the way in which you act in the business, in order that other people within the organization or externally like take the lead. So, and I think that's kind of the hardest element of it, because it's my business and it's my baby. I do feel there's some things that's very easy. Like, you know, I feel more passionately about, you know, my business than, you know, somebody that I've employed, and I shouldn't expect those guys to like feel as passionately about it. However, I think the fun bits of it, you know, like, you know, speaking to you guys or having a sales call and stuff like that, that's just one side of it. I think the hard part is just putting yourself in front of your people and protecting your people every single day. So, you know, making sure that you're making the sales so you can put the money on the table, making sure that you're the person who's attending the difficult conversations or going with them to a client, doing like the hard and dirty things all of the time. That's what I believe is the most important part, because if people can see that you're not only doing all the nice things where, you know, you go into the client calls and or when the world opens up, you're going and having a drink. If people see you doing the dirty things and you're willing to do the hard things and protect them in the moments that they need it, then I think that resonates with them about what a leader should be, and it's somebody who takes care of other people.
Yeah, I think the leading by example there, from what you're saying, is really, really clear as well, of doing that hard work and having people follow you rather than be told what to do as well. So having that source of inspiration through your actions rather than necessarily through your words. And say as a leader, if you have certain strengths and certain weaknesses that you know, and say one of the weaknesses is I find it really difficult, say, to go and do a sales call, not necessarily personally myself, but say if someone did, then would it be okay as a leader to then have someone do it for them, even though it's something that's hard and difficult and they should lead first with? Or should they just play to their strengths? Or should they learn to get better at that weakness so they can then lead by example rather than delegation?
It's a good question. It is, I believe, I'm gonna get this wrong, but it's Jean Piaget. So I think he was French or Belgian kind of philosopher and professor who did some quite early work around like learning and behaviors. And I think it was Piaget that said that you only improve if you're set like challenging goals and challenging objectives, but they can't be so challenging that you're completely out of your depth, because you'll just lose confidence. So you've got to do this form of incrementalism where everybody is being stretched, but not stretched so much that they snap. And it's understanding the points where people will snap. Like that's really what you're doing. And the points where people will snap, like stepping in and be either building a bridge for them or giving them a life raft, those are the points that are really important. I think, you know, talking about myself is quite strange, but like I think the guys who've worked for me and who work with me now will say that I probably give them like a lot of leeway to go and do their own thing. Like I'm not somebody who just like wraps my arms around people. I think people have got to be self-motivated, self-started to do the important things themselves. But what I always did was like when they were under fire, I'd stand in front of bullets for them, and make sure that when they were pushing themselves too hard and they were in danger of going over the edge, I stepped in and supported them.
Yeah, and that sounds to me like a true leader. And even you didn't call yourself a leader beforehand, so that's pretty interesting that you would do that, and it's something that you would continue to do, but you don't necessarily see yourself as defined by that word. So I think, what if yourself as a leader, you know that this, by putting yourself in the fire or by doing that thing, you're going to snap, your resilience will break. What do you do then? Do you still do it because you have to, that's what a leader does? Or do you stop, give yourself a break and come back to it later on, or delegate to someone else? Like, if you know you're being stretched beyond capacity by doing something, is that where you just have to suck it up and do it? Or do you stop and really reassess if it's the right path?
I think I just suck it up. Like, the beauty of running your own business is the buck stops with you. And the horrible thing about running your own business is the buck stops with you. So ultimately, I have to, when the going gets tough and when things are pretty horrible and when I feel as though I'm maybe at breaking point, which isn't very often, but I think how I cope with it is by just looking at the people who are who I'm responsible for, and taking a moment to consider, like, what needs to be done to get to, support those people, to protect those people, the lives, it's not just the people who work for me, but it's their husbands and wives and things like that. And that's my motivation. And I'm not saying that I'm unbreakable. Like, everybody has a breaking point. Like, my family see me breaking breaking point all the time, and I am, like, easily to frustrate and potentially anger, especially when I'm coding, because I'm not the best coder. But I think ultimately, like, being accountable and being responsible, feeling like the things you do matter, stops you from breaking. Just really importantly, there is it's a bit of a horrible study, but so I won't get into, like, the ethics of it, but there was a study around dogs, and what they did was they put dogs kind of in a pen, and part of it was electric shock, and they did various kind of tests on these dogs. One of them with one of the sets of the dogs, they had electric shock, and then when the dog moved, the electric shock stopped. And then with another set of dogs, they did an electric shock, but the electric shock didn't stop. And the results of that, I'm probably murdering this, but the results of that was quite interesting, because then what they did was they got the two sets of dogs and they put them in a pen where they had to jump over a fence to get to kind of a state where it wasn't an electric shock. What happened was the dogs that when they moved, the shock stopped, immediately started moving when the electric shock happened and jumped over the fence. But the dogs that had constantly been shocked just sat there and stayed in pain. What this study is around learned helplessness. So if you've always had pain all of your life and you don't ever see that there's a way to get out of this painful situation that you're in, then you just stand there, like, crippled and in pain. Whereas even if you've had some moments, some wins in your life that you can hang on to, you can then, you feel like you can do something about it. And you feel like you can, even if you're in pain now, you can make yourself into a state where there's not going to be that pain. I think it's interesting, like, there's probably differences in personality types and gender and stuff like that around it. And I think, men in particular like think that they can just fix a problem. Like there's no problem that can't be fixed, and sometimes you can't fix problems. And I'm wondering whether or not like that's part of my issue. But I always feel like as bad as it gets, or as if I'm at 250, 300% of capacity, I always feel like I can do something about it. And so that's why I don't really have a break. Like I actually say to my wife, like, she got annoyed at me because I said I don't like holidays because I feel like I'm not doing something. And then when I'm not doing something, you feel like the world's just coming to you rather than you're going to the world. I've changed my tact on that. Yeah, I've changed my communication strategy. We might have a holiday this year when everything opens up.
Nice. But looking forward to that. But it's super interesting listening to that example of that study, because I think it probably speaks to something that's often cited or spoken about in leadership and management conversation, and that's how far a leader is born or shaped, and to what extent that's something that is it innate? Are some people naturally better leaders? Are people just made better leaders over time? In your experience in trying to make your own teams leaders in their own ways or their own roles, but also in previous organizations, what's your take on that? Is it very much a learned thing, being a leader, or is it something that actually there is some innate spark there somewhere? Or is the classic answer it's partway between the two?
Yeah, little column A, little column B. Why that question is difficult is because we associate like leadership, or I associate leadership with the hierarchy that I've been working in. Like, so I've worked in banks, building societies, telcos, and I think about the hierarchy. And now you've mentioned that to me, and I've started to see it through that prism, and then rejected that. Like, I've probably seen a lot of leadership from people who aren't particularly my boss or my boss's boss. In fact, in many cases, I've seen a lack of leadership when it comes to that. Whereas if I like look at the types of people that I've worked with, like often like my peer group or even people who reported into me have offered me like the types of like empathetic support and leadership in a crisis and the motivation to just get stuff done when it's required. That those are true leadership qualities. It's not, and perhaps it's just not the case that those leadership qualities like ultimately result in being promoted, because there's other types of things that are important in that regard, which is probably a lot more around nepotism and politics.
Yeah.
And look, I'll just be frank to you guys. I don't mind nepotism and politics, but leadership and those qualities about who you are as a person, who, to use a war analogy, who you want to be in the trenches with in a crisis, like that's sometimes different to the types of people that do well in organizations. And I think I don't think that that's particularly controversial when you think about it.
No, I don't think it is. And I think the kind of politics and nepotism, it definitely has its point in the conversation. But picking up on hierarchy, I think is super interesting, because people see hierarchy as a traditional mechanism, I feel. But actually, as a still quite a young organization, how does TMAC approach hierarchy, maybe with that different edge in terms of trying to encourage that leadership within everyone, not just by title? Like, what's the difference?
I think the difference is the types of the types of people that you employ. I think initially it's the types of people you employ. So we employ a group of people who are very challenging. Like, they're challenging to me. They'll challenge my opinions. They'll challenge each other's opinion. And so the very confident self-starters who want to do well and want to push themselves. Now that creates a different set of problems. It creates a different set of problems in, like, how do you manage, like, a group of individuals that work like this, and how do you create a camaraderie and a team spirit around, like, a group of what is essentially, like, quite strong-minded, strong-willed people. But I think there is just this single thread of, even though we all speak our mind, we were talking about it the other day. I don't know whether or not it's somebody said, oh, well, all of us are very good critical thinkers, but I don't necessarily think it's around critical thinking. I think what we have is a relatively diverse group of people who, even though they don't necessarily agree with the other person's, like, opinion or ideology, they don't hold that against them. And that's quite difficult in today's age, because everybody's quite seems to be diametrically opposed on every single matter now. But even the things that we disagree on as within a company, on projects or on products, or just in general chit chat, I think there's a single thread which is around us having each other's, like, trust and support, and us not thinking that there's that an opinion that you may think is wrong necessarily defines you as a person.
Defines the relationship. Yeah. Would you say that that's a scale up thing? Is that going to maybe wean away in a way as you grow, and that kind of culture, is that going to be hard to keep as you get bigger? Like, because that's kind of hierarchy meets hiring the right people meets creating the right culture. Is that going to stay the same? Obviously you hope that it will. What are you kind of thinking on that?
I think it'd be foolish to say that it's going to stick together, because it's just impossible. It's what we have right now is a small group of like-minded people, like, all pushing towards a shared goal, and things will, like, have to change. They'll have to, like, as you become, like, a more mature company, in a couple of different ways. So I think running a startup is like being a wartime prime minister. There's, like, wartime prime ministers and peacetime prime ministers, and they both serve different purposes. And as you go from startup, like, it's about action, and it's about messaging, and it's about, like, vision, and it's about galvanizing everybody. I think over the next few years, as we move to peacetime, hopefully, it's about putting the right structures in place, putting the right ownership in place, refining the culture. So we will not be able to take all of what we are into the next 4 or 5 years, but we can take some of the essence of what we are and instill that in all of the new people that start and into the company and its culture. And I actually think that it's not attractive to stay as we are. We're a startup where we're running very, very hot. Everybody's kind of maxed out. That's kind of the culture, and everybody loves it. Well, some more than others. I run at my maximum as well. And that's probably that's probably a cost to, like, my family life and things like that. But I'm fortunate enough that my wife is the most understanding woman in the world. But it's not attractive to carry that. It's not, in fact, it's not sustainable. It's good for a time, but then you have to like normalize. And so I think for us, it's about the normalization, distilling what we are, not losing sight of what we are, but then normalizing that over the next 3 to 5 years into something that's like a real sustainable business.
Nice. Almost refreshing outlook for yourself to have at the stage you are as well, because a lot of people will try to retain that culture and try and hold on to what makes you guys special, but actually realizing that you can't keep all of it and you want to keep the core elements and help that guide a future growth is definitely quite refreshing to hear as well. But then as a leader, as you do hit this scale and you want to keep those core elements, how do you shape your organization in like a quantitative way? Like, how do you measure your impact on culture, and how do you deem it to be successful if you've implemented it in a meaningful way as well?
So it's a great question. So I think what we're installing at the moment is we're going through an OKR process. So we're doing objectives and key results, and obviously you've got your financial performance and product and all that type of good stuff in there. But one of the central pillars is culture. And what I'm very interested in is a systemic approach to culture, to feedback, and creating positive reinforcement and positive feedback loops, like on a kind of a weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis. So we've got some plans going on right now, of which we have some former Hosang alumni involved in, around like creating a systemic approach to culture and to driving like the right type of culture. Some of that is around, I think these, the Ray Dalio TED Talks, which is around like transparency, and then radical candor. Like, I don't think that we're going to do radical candor. In fact, I don't think radical candor is for everybody. I think sometimes it's good to have a conversation like behind closed doors and not just be super honest all of the time. But that's just me. And I'm an honest person, but I just don't think that gets you the. How do we like get feedback on our core beliefs and ensure that systemically we're course correcting for any types of behaviors that is pushing us away from those core beliefs? And that's from new starters providing me with feedback to senior managers getting feedback and then having peer-reviewed peer-to-peer sessions about how they could have done things better. We want to promote a culture of continuous improvement, and I think that is our culture. It's like continuous improvement. It's like honesty and continuous improvement. It's like the heart of what we do. If we can nail that over the next 12 months, like that will be like one of the single most important things out. We do speech analytics products, we do AI products, we do all sorts of different products, but nailing that culture piece is equally important.
Yeah, I think it will be too as well. And once you've got this culture down, as you're getting there and you're kind of coming to define it and coming to understand what it means within your analysis, how do you then use that in the recruitment for one, but also in how you onboard new employees? Do they have to fit to your culture when they first join, or can you shape them to it once they've already joined? And especially if there's no one, or if there's someone in your current organization that doesn't fit that culture you're trying to develop, can they be morphed into it? Or would it have to be a conversation where you would remove people who didn't fit to it?
See, this is why I'm not a good leader, because I don't have a great response for that. So like, I believe that TMAC should be a broad church of opinion, a broad church of diversity, a diversity of thinking, actually, and an environment where ideas are heard and listened to with respect. So I think in that regards, we want to make sure that we get the right people in at the beginning who are dear to that culture. I think over the last 3 years, we've had people come and go, and I think the reason why they've come and gone isn't anything to do with like their core skill set. I think it just came down to them not necessarily enjoying the way that we do things because of the way that we do it. And so thus far, I think that people who don't enjoy the hustle and don't enjoy the grind and don't want to exist in a world where we have challenging conversations, they generally like leave anyway because that's just not for them. And there's no hard feelings. Like some of the people who have left, like I've got like a lot of respect for, and like they've been they were part of our journey, but they just didn't. It was just culturally they just didn't fit. I think that becomes harder as you scale and there's more people. But I think we've got the correct frameworks and controls in place. I'm fortunate that it's not just a leadership team of one. Like I'm fortunate. I think we've got like 6 other CEOs, like who are all like really, really strong and are able to land the cultural message within each of their teams. And so I think for the near term, for the next sort of 24 months, like I'm very positive around like being able to instill and maintain like the correct culture through the recruitment process and through the onboarding process. After that, who knows? Too far in the future.
Cool. So thinking about hierarchy, we've spoken also about leadership and culture. Really, what does the future of leaders and leadership within the workplace look like? What's that ideal that we should all be working towards?
So I don't know if it's around leadership per se, but I think it's around creativity. So, and what I'm seeing a lot of interesting people doing is bringing different types of people together to be creative. Now that could be creative with AI, it could be creative with people, it could be creative, with solutions. It could be taking people from diverse sectors and putting them at a problem around greenhouse gases or around like coronavirus or whatever. But I think it's around creativity. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So I come from a creative field and I completely rejected like that creativity because I thought that it wouldn't get me taken seriously. And then I did programming and data science because I wanted to be taken seriously. I think I've said to people before, it's the clown who then wants to play Hamlet. So people act as a clown, they're a buffoon, and then all of them grow up and they want a serious role. Michael Crawford, actually, he was in a sitcom and then played Phantom of the Opera, which I thought was quite. So that's a bit random, but I always see it a little bit like that. And so I completely rejected that creative side of things, and I almost sleepwalked into the fact that now all I do is creative stuff. I talk for a living and communicate. I think around like complex problems and then draw them out for people. Like my ability as a programmer is relatively poor, but I think my ability as a solution provider and a problem solver is very good. And it's the problem solving aspect that's going to be the challenge in the future. So robots, automation, AI will be able to do so much, but in the next 10 years, 20 years, you're not going to be able to replace a human's ability to create. And leaders who can set a culture that promotes creation, those are the guys who will succeed. That can be creation of things, or can be creativity in terms of communication. I think those are the people who are going to see the huge benefits, especially over the next kind of 10 to 20 years, when a lot of people are distracted with automation. Those that are promoting creativity will thrive.
Yeah, I think that's a really good almost vision for the next 10, 20 years. And I'd say I have to fundamentally agree with you on it, to be honest, because I think that's what makes us human. And even from a young person's perspective, thinking about the future, their job role and their place within it, we're almost told, our generation is about, okay, make sure your job is future proof. Make sure that your work doesn't get taken up by AI. And as much as we can think about doing that and trying to find job roles that fit by becoming a data scientist, by becoming someone who creates the code, it's also by realizing that, okay, some of my roles are going to be automated. That's the nature of it. They are repetitive tasks that I don't need to do day by day. Cool. Let's forget about them and focus on what makes us human. And that is the creativity. That is the ideas. That is the technology, the way in which we come up with different solutions to different challenges we face as a species from decades and centuries ago. And I think that really is going to play out across the next 10, 20 years, almost the new revolution more than anything else, of taking away automated repetitive work and replacing it with creative work, where people are almost unstripped and able to actually do things that they're meant to be doing as humans, rather than doing monotonous work that's repetitive and frankly boring, to be honest. So I think unleashing human potential is really where AI, where automation can really fit in as well.
Can I just make to a couple of points? You're absolutely spot on. Like data science will be automated. Like, so when my daughter was born, I was like, I wanted to be a data scientist. I wanted to learn to code. She's 11 years old now. She's learning to code. But everybody's going to code in the future. Data science is one of the things where if you can get perfect data sets, you don't need anyone to smash the data together. You don't need anybody to build the models. Everything would all fit perfectly, and all of the decisions and stuff will be made. So data science in itself is like, massively problematic in that field. And so, yeah, I think that, yeah, as you said, like the creative problem solving aspect is hugely, hugely valuable,
Yeah, definitely. I was trying to bring in Ryan. What are your thoughts on that, on the creativity side?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one for me, because on your point there, Jimmy, of everyone will code, that sort of thing, my half personal philosophy, half kind of forcing myself down a certain route is kind of, I've never really wanted to either. I've always had that interest. I've always had that want to understand how technology works and understand how I can use it. But actually, my personal point of view on that has always been, I don't want to learn to code. I've learned languages before, fantastic, but applying it to coding languages, completely different in my head. And maybe that's why my skill set won't be future proof, like I don't know what Charlie was talking about, but I'm kind of running that risk at the moment, and that's okay. So for me, and for anyone else kind of listening who's not the kind of, yeah, I'll learn anything type necessarily, and of course learning new skills is super important, and exposing yourself to new things equally as fulfilling. My ambition and my really application of myself, I guess, goes in the other direction of that creative problem solving and saying, okay, well, what can I use my mind for in a different way that can still create outcomes that other people haven't seen, or solve problems in a way that other people haven't expected, and create outcomes for people that are just as fulfilling, no matter what kind of area or department that that is, and particularly if that's in a team of people, then all the better. So yeah, I think my point of view would be that the techno side, the automation type side, is something that everyone will have to learn within or learn to cope around, but not necessarily be able to dive in and do everything themselves, if that makes sense.
I completely agree, and I think this goes to like there's a weird thing that goes on in the market, especially when it comes to programming and coding and stuff, that kind of, it maybe speaks to what you're talking about here, which is, so there's a move towards low code or no code solutions for all of this stuff. And so, you can do, RPA, but you don't have to code. You can just drag and drop stuff. You can do this, but you can just drag and drop stuff. And, me and my CEO, George, talk about it. And it's like, yeah, but it's like, that's like playing a Casio keyboard and just pressing a button on the pre-programmed stuff. Like, whereas I don't need to low code or no code anything, because it's quicker for me to program it than it is to just drag and drop things on a screen. And there's a creativity in that, which then means that I can then go to no code and low code. I already understand like what I want to do and I can skip to it, but not knowing the fundamentals of it, it's like not knowing scales playing guitar, or it's you're playing piano. It's creative what you do. One of my friends, it was the first time I met him. It was like a boyfriend of one of my wife's friends, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a programmer." And he said, "Oh, I couldn't do that." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Oh, I like working with my hands." I'm like, what do you think I program with? Like, and there is a creativity about what you're doing. And I think not knowing how to code. I think I did a LinkedIn post the other day, a bit provocative around leaders who don't code, and not knowing how to code is not important, but understanding your fundamentals around it, I think is important. Not for any other reason that it unlocks ideas in your brain about how things can be done. So yeah, I'm not like a everyone should code kind of person anymore. But I do think there's like, what are the mechanics of the thing that you're trying to solve is important, and then that stitches together with your creativity.
Yeah, no, definitely. You got to know what you're looking at. You got to understand as a leader, as a founder, even as a young employee coming up through organizations. You've got to know what you're looking at, even if you're not engaging with it in that more detailed way. But our kind of final question for you, really, as we've spoken about that workplace of tomorrow, that kind of future of leadership in the workplace, really, what do you want to see more from in terms of employees and employers, kind of both sides of that coin, to reach that workplace of tomorrow? What are the practicalities behind getting us there?
I think from an employee's point of view, I want to see more openness. I think more openness to different voices and to different ways of thinking. I do see a little bit of a move towards a view that there are fundamental things that are right and fundamental things that are wrong, and never the twain shall meet. And I don't think that that's a good thing for society, really. I'll give you an example of that. I believe, a very liberal person, but we should be able to take into account like conservative views, even though they may be diametrically opposed to the things that we feel. And some things like I can be pretty shocked about, from a conservative stance, but that doesn't mean that we need to take impassioned stances against this type of stuff. And I do see like a lot of young people get very passionate about things, and I like the passion, but I feel as though like some of it is misplaced and misdirected. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said like, the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. And being humble enough to understand that you don't really know anything. You don't know anything at all. Like the smartest person in the world knows hardly anything. And coming at it from that perspective and understanding that how you build bridges between like different people, I think is important, and not like siloing yourself away. And it's really, really hard, because the truth is spiky, and listening to other people that you don't agree with is difficult, but it's so much worthwhile, because you start to see that we're more alike than apart in so many different areas. So I see, and I see that being quite a challenge for people as they're coming up, and then for leaders, I think we still, in so many aspects, adhere to the old industrial revolution kind of structures around what we class as competence, what we class as being a good worker, what we class as kind of the core competencies. And I think we need to kind of smash through that. And for one, I do think that type of view, it holds back like a lot of people from the workplace that would be absolutely fantastic. It was interesting, actually. I was speaking to Nicola, our HR person, and we know that we've got a problem with gender. Like we've got a gender imbalance. Some of that's from like we started a company with a group of people who we all knew, and then that's come around, and we're working hard on that. And I said, one thing that might be unattractive is because of the hours that we work, because we work all the time. And Nick went, no, that's fantastic, because that means that I can work 5 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock, then I can have the day off, and then I can log back in like for a few hours at night. Like that's the flexibility that you get. And I think I never thought of it like that, but then I was like, oh, like yeah, that's exactly what you could do. And like nobody would bat an eyelid at that. I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure
flexibility.
Some of the guys do that already. So I think, understanding the roles of flexible working, unlocking potential that is currently like not unlocked through like your working practices, and like just a relentless focus on like creativity, because post automation, like those are that's the thing that's going to be most in demand.
Nice. Yeah, definitely agree with you there. I think you've got a really good outlook on both employees and employers, that really some great advice to take forward, I think, on both elements. So I think that really concludes today's episode. So thank you guys for listening, but we'd of course love to hear your opinion on leadership within startups. Drop us a comment on the social posts, and you'll of course be featured in our future episodes as well. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys for listening, and of course thank Jimmy for joining us. It's been a really great episode. I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, you can find Jimmy online on LinkedIn, or you can find TMAC at tmac.ai, and that will conclude the episode.